Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. This is episode 579. Yes, 579. I sometimes oversay this, but we've got a really great guest this week. We've got Adii Pienaar, the joint founder of WooCommerce, and a couple of other startups. So, Adii, would you like to give the listeners and viewers a quick intro, a 20-second intro about yourself?
Yeah, totally. And I think the first thing is, for anyone that can see, is I actually had a mate of mine who recently joined WooCommerce, get me some WooCommerce swag that came just in time for this interview, which is pretty cool. But yeah, as you mentioned there, Jonathan, I'm a co-founder in WooThemes and WooCommerce. I subsequently left and founded another company called Conversio, where we built email marketing automation software for e-commerce brands. So really continuing that journey for me about working with e-commerce brands. Sold Conversio to Campaign Monitor in August 2019, spent last year with Campaign Monitor, and then recently spun up a new startup called Cogsy, where we're helping e-commerce brands make smarter purchasing decisions.
And even if that wasn't enough, he's written a book, Life Profitability, the New Measure of Entrepreneurial Success. So you just do the odd thing. You only multitask a little bit, do you? Right. And I also got my great co-host, Stephen Saunders. Stephen, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the new listeners and viewers?
Yeah, Stephen Sauter from zipfish.io. We make WordPress fast by optimizing themes, plugins, and the code that runs on the server.
And before we go into the main areas of the interview, I'll be asking Adii about the early days of WooCommerce. Has he got any new reflections about those early days? And then in the second half, we'll be talking about his book and the main things that he is attempting to get across in the book. And then in the bonus content, it's going to be a free-for-all, and we're just going to throw in anything that comes to our mind during the interview. But before we get into the main part, I just want to talk about one of my major sponsors, and that's Kinsta Hosting. Kinsta Hosting is a WordPress-only hosting provider. I think they're one of the better ones on the market. A great team. I cannot sing their praises higher. Great people to work with, and they provide great technology as well. Google Cloud, great interface, all the bells and whistles that you're looking for as a developer, not only for yourself, but for your clients. If that sounds attractive, and it should do, I suggest that you go over to Kinsta, have a look at their what they've got to offer, and buy one of their packages for yourself or for your clients. And please, if you do that, please tell Kinsta that you heard about them on the WP-Tonic show. It really helps Kinsta, and it really does support the show substantially. So into the main...
Sorry, Jonathan, but by the way, serendipitously, I'm a Kinsta customer as well with Cogsy, nice. Right? So doubling down on the ad there. So anyone that sends... tells Kinsta about hearing this about them on the WP-Tonic show, like tell them Adii was on the show and Adii loves t-shirts.
Right, there we go. Well, right, that's great. What more can you ask for, Kinsta? So let's go into the main part of the first half. So, I think, because I think you live in America now, but you were based in South Africa in the early days. Is that correct? Yeah. Of WooCommerce?
Yeah, and I'm still in Cape Town, South Africa. Born and bred here. Never had the desire to live elsewhere in the world.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. It's a beautiful country. Unfortunately, I've never been here, but a lot of my family have visited South Africa, so I know a fair bit about it. So how did you get into, building WooCommerce? What was the early days? Why did you get involved with your co-founders in the e-commerce space, Adii?
Yeah. So I mean, the precursor to WooCommerce was just WooThemes, and WooThemes was at the height of, I think. So I built the first theme that became WooThemes, first theme that led me to meeting Magnus and Mark way back in 2007. And at that stage, the only others that were doing similar was, one of them was Brian Gardner, right, who eventually founded New Studio Press. but it was very kind of a new space. And that's really where we started as WooThemes, right? We were building themes on top of WordPress. It was in those days where people was kind of testing the limits of what WordPress could be doing, right? Trying to do other things that weren't just kind of your typical kind of your blogs showing a bunch of posts in a chronological order. And what effectively happened was we stumbled to this category of kind of themes that we called business themes back then. But it was that typical kind of brochure-like website that kind of most businesses, any industry, would need to kind of give them this online presence. And it grew so fast, became so popular. And then those customers of ours just kept asking us, hey, how do I add a shopping cart to this? And that was that genesis. Like we initially thought and WooCommerce itself has a slightly longer story, but we initially tried to just use plugins that were out there because we thought we were a themes company. We never thought we were a platform company, right? Or a plugins company, which is what it eventually became, right? I mean, after eventually launching WooCommerce, I believe late 2010, early 2011, but within a year, it completely flipped the business to where WooCommerce was 90% of the revenue, right? So in that stage, I mean, we're talking about a 4-year-old company completely flipping its revenue from one product category to this whole new thing.
Wow. That's an insight. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, with developing WooCommerce, when you decided to take on the whole e-commerce space, that adds a lot of complexity. Like jumping from themes to e-commerce is a pretty big step. Was that something that was like debated a lot internally, like inside the company? Like, is this something we actually want to take on? Or were you guys very optimistic, like, oh no, like we figured out all this theme stuff, like we know what we're doing. This is like we can dominate this space? Or was it like, hey, let's dabble in this, let's see what happens, who knows, kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So I think we essentially have 3 failed attempts to trying to create something like WooCommerce. And I don't think we had the name even, but essentially our own e-commerce platform. And all of them were, I would say, at arm's length, i.e. not fully committed to it because we didn't think we had the DNA in us. And I actually think that the part of the WooCommerce story that often doesn't get told with enough vigor and with enough transparency is the fact that when WooCommerce, the WooCommerce itself as a product was a fork of another open source product called GigaShop, and Jay Coster, Mike Jolly, who were the lead engineer and designer on that product, we hired them, right? And I think they came in and they effectively, from a product standpoint at least, directed where things needed to go. And I think Magnus, Mark, and I were great at identifying talent, right, and giving them all the resources they need, the strategic guidance, etc. But I don't think when you think about doing things slightly outside of your comfort zone, like being able to trust people that you work with, like Jay and Mike were like integral to that. I don't think without them WooCommerce exists today, right? As an example,
well,
right?
I was going to ask you about this because obviously there was a little bit of controversialism around that. A lot of it I thought was extremely unfair to you and your other joint founders of WooCommerce, because some people in the community at the time said you literally, I don't think they said it directly, but in a roundabout way, which isn't unusual in WordPress. They literally said you stole the code, which is totally, I don't know where to get that from. First, it's open source, so anybody can use the code. They could use WooCommerce code. And secondly, my understanding, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but my understanding of it is that you made an offer to buy the business and the people rejected it. And some of the key staff decided that you were better entrepreneurs than their employees. And because it's not slavery, they've got every right to go and find employment wherever they like. Have I got the basic facts right?
Yeah, totally. And I think, even in hindsight, I kind of get it, right? But I think when anyone builds a business on top of an open source platform, whether it's WordPress or something else, then they also buy into these things, whether they agree with it or not, right? Like those aren't like, you can't play a game and acknowledge what the rules are and then pick and choose which rules you want to adhere to and which you don't. Like all of those things construct the game, and that's just the dynamics of it. Like I think that's the first thing that I will say to it, which is why, like, you know, to me, it's almost a moot point. We did nothing illegal. We did nothing unethical, right? We just did something people didn't like. And I don't think that's enough of a reason to not do something. The second part of it is
can I just interrupt? Yeah. On reflecting back, why do you think they didn't like it? Why did you think some people in the community started gunning for you and your other co-founders?
I gut feel it's insecurity, right? I think many people that were building products in the space looked at it and said, like, well, if we could do this to Gigashop, like, who else can do this to us, right? Which, and effectively what that means is that I keep telling people that, you know, those initial experiences for me as an entrepreneur really shaped and still shapes the way I think about entrepreneurship in a way that I don't think entrepreneurship and building a business is a zero-sum game. Right. So like I am all for competition, a rising tide lifts all boats, all of those kind of things, because WordPress and WooCommerce, WooThemes and WooCommerce taught me a single thing, which is if like IP, right, isn't your defensible moat, right, that you can build here, you have to do other things. And with Woo, what we did was we were absolutely superb at branding, at marketing, right, and the customer service. So I think like people had insecurities there. I think the people who were kind of, you know, frustrated by our decision there probably looked at their own businesses, their own products, and thought that, hey, my code is the most valuable thing that I have, and this can just be forked. And that's not great, right? Which again meant like that's probably misaligned then with that business model of then don't build something on open source software.
Yeah, over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Like, I think too often, like even me, like I want to hold on to like that secret sauce, right? Which is like, it's easy to say, oh, that's the actual code that I'm writing, or that's the patents that I have. But when it comes down to like the actual thing, that makes up such a little component of why somebody engages with a company or buys from a company. And it is a little bit like, it's a little naive to say that my thing is like that secret sauce that only like this is what I have to protect. Like, no, you have to like look at it like from a much larger global view, where it's that brand, it's that marketing, it's the support, because all of those things come along with that product. Like, it's not just, oh, here's some code, run it or don't run it. Like, you need support for that. You need to know that that company has your back, and that, you know, it's being iterated on. And the surest way to succeed, like in any industry, is just like iterate faster, like be better than the other guys. Like, it's not about the actual patent that you have. Like, sure, it could be, or if you're building like a actual product, right? But like in 20 years or 40 years or whatever the patent law is, like it's going to be gone. Like, you got to be faster, you got to be better, you got to do things and be competitive on multiple levels. So that's, yeah, exactly.
And I'll actually add, without calling out the company in the recent past, but there's a company in the e-commerce space building a checkout product, and they've raised a ton of money. Like literally, I can't remember the last number, you know, north of $100 million in just the last 2 years, went from kind of your co-founders to 200 plus people. And the challenge in that, and then I'll kind of, you know, bring it back to how this relates to, especially to Jay and Mike and WooCommerce and Gigashop back in the day, is I think like it's all dandy because the founder was on Twitter the other day saying like, this is a rocket ship, like everyone wants to join my company, whatnot. And I pointed out and I said, you know what, it is very, very easy for anyone to join a fast growing startup and get paid a lot of money, right? That's an easy decision. As soon as shit hits the fan, I don't know whether I'm allowed to kind of swear, but as soon as shit it's the fan, right? Then those people are off, right? Because there isn't that kind of that connective tissue, that bigger purpose of actually being here, right? Yeah. And I think if we bring that back to ultimately, like, and I don't mean this as criticism of Gigashop, right? But ultimately, we had made Jay and Mike an offer, right? Which they accepted, right? And in that sense, it was a free market. And we obviously had something there for them that was more attractive, more aligned with what they needed or wanted to do personally, right? And to your point, Stephen, I think when you do those kinds of things in business, and especially around people, like that's when you start building that much more wholesome, defensible moat. It's not just this one single thing, because if it's only your tech, if it's only your code, that's a single point of failure in your business. And like business, especially if you want to build a long-term, bigger business, needs to be more robust, more resilient than a single point of failure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, like take like some of like easy digital downloads, like just to like name another like competitor like in that same space, right? Like one reason why like I trust their products and like Sandhills Development like as a group of people is because like I like some of the stuff that they put out, and they have some really smart people working there. And so to me, it's more than just, oh, here's a plugin that fulfills a need. It's like, no, here's a group of guys that I resonate with, and I like what they're doing, and I like how they're approach to life. And so like to me, it's more than just a checkout system for a digital download. It's like, no, I like the company behind it, and I'm going to choose them over anybody else right now because of much more than just the code that's running underneath the hood.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's great. Now, when you decided, or I just want to ask you about when Automattic took over WooCommerce, was you actively, in your joint partners, were you actively looking for a buyout, or was it a situation where Automattic approached you and then you thought, wow, somebody really, a serious company really wants to buy our company for a substantial amount of money, we should consider this? Which one was it? Or was it a mixture of both?
Yeah, so I'll share another one of those stories that is definitely public knowledge, but I don't think people necessarily connect the dots and like clearly, right? So the simple answer is we'd always had interest in WooCommerce, both from kind of your venture capitalists to other acquirers. So they were always on our radar. There was and it was significant interest at all times. I actually stepped down as CEO of Woo end of November, I think in November, early December 2013. And I, at that stage, sold my equity to Magnus and Mark. So I was not familiar. I'm still, to this day, I do not know. I don't know any of the details with regards to the Automattic deal. I found out about the deal when it was announced on TechCrunch on that day, for example. So again, like many people, they don't. I said I've been public about that. I wasn't involved. I was out by that stage, but I don't think people necessarily.
What led to? You don't mind me asking. You don't mind me asking. What led to that actual particular decision?
Yeah, I think probably some context first, which was I think for Magnus, Mark, and myself. WooCommerce, Woo, the whole Woo, but let's just say WooCommerce was really a roller coaster ride in the sense that, we were first time entrepreneurs. We were learning kind of, as we were doing, right? It wasn't like we were prepped and well versed in terms of what this should look like. And I think as the business grew and developed, we also grew and developed as individuals. And what I got to a point where, for me at least, I love a challenge, and I wanted to see like how far and how big can this thing go. And Mag and Mark had different considerations at that stage, and I had a very, very concrete idea of what I wanted to build back then, and that idea is still on the radar now. I actually I will name drop this at least. I had a chat with Matt Mullenweg about this literally a couple of weeks ago, right? But Mag and Mark didn't feel at that stage that we were ready. It wasn't within our DNA, and it definitely wasn't, that I can agree with. It was an ambitious project. And when we decided that we weren't going to do that in Woo, I decided that as an individual, as Adii, I needed a new challenge. And that morphed into something a little bigger for me, which was I wanted to prove that I can build another successful business. I wanted to prove that I can take all these learnings from those couple of years, I can distill the best things, and I can reapply that into a new business. So I ultimately made a very personal decision there to step away, to found another company. And the one thing that I can say there is, even if the reported numbers in terms of Automattic's acquisition of Woo is, off by 50%, it means that I sold for a massive discount compared to kind of what Magnus Mark sold for 18 months later. And the honesty in all of that is I've never regretted that for a single point in my life, right? Purely because I had to tick this box of, can I do this again? And I ultimately did that. I mean, as mentioned, I sold Conversio to Campaign Monitor 18 months ago. But yeah, that is that whole story. I mean, it wasn't, it's nothing kind of nefarious, and that it was ultimately just me figuring out what I really wanted to do next, regardless of the success we had had up until that point.
Oh, that's great. We're going to go for our break. When we come back, we'll be talking about Adii's new book, Life Profitability, the new measure of entrepreneurial success. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We've had Adii on the show, the joint founder of WooCommerce. I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, Adii. I think we've already covered some interesting territory. So on to your book. I haven't read the book, but I have listened extensively to a number of your interviews. What I get about what you're trying with the book is that difficult balance between total identification, your total personal identification with a business, and the pros and also the downfalls of that, and also why that sometimes can be a bit difficult. And the other factor I get from it is that I'm not trying to be sexist here at all, but I think women in some ways are more successful in keeping, not totally identifying all their identity with their business, their personal identity. They always have the ability to break their identity into certain areas. Am I totally off about one of the main points you were trying to make? And what do you think I've just stated?
Yeah, I'll probably start with the latter. I think, one thing that I've learned over the years, Jonathan, is this this notion of toxic masculinity. And I think, unfortunately, that toxic masculinity, for all the wrong reasons, has gotten intertwined in capitalism, mostly because it's also a system and a kind of a view of society that was constructed by a bunch of old white guys, right? So I think that I don't know, it's just off, right? And I ultimately think that we've made entrepreneurship and we've made capitalism and we've made success such a kind of brute force pursuit, such a binary, like, yes, you're successful, or no, you're not successful. Yes, you're good enough, or no, you're not good enough. And I think I just came, and I'm actually pretty riled up, and I need to, and I know that that's the masculine energy in me as well. I think what I've just learned is that there's so much more to life than just that. There's a way to view life and our businesses and our professional ambitions in a much softer way, in a way where I at least believe, and I am very aware of both the masculine and feminine energies within myself, and I know in which context, like, one of those two are more dominant. And that has nothing to do with my gender either, right? That's just me acknowledging that there's these two poles and there's energy flowing at all times. And I think as I've become more aware of that other side of me, the side of me that, I maybe didn't get nurtured into as a young boy, for example, I've just started seeing a much broader spectrum of how I would then define, life profitability, right? What I would, kind of define as a profitable life, which isn't this very narrow pursuit of, hey, I need to build a very, very, very big business. And, for me, we've been speaking about WooCommerce, right? I was very, very young when we got into, as I mentioned, that absolute kind of roller coaster and rocket ship. And it took me years, and even just, beyond kind of, Woo, after I'd left, to get to a point in my life where everything almost broke down, because what I hadn't realized is, as I was running on this very, very narrow path, I was creating so much collateral damage along the way. I was incurring so many life costs, for myself and for others. And the brutal part of that was I wasn't aware. And I reckon, like, I consider myself to be a pretty smart person, right? But I was not aware because I was so focused on just this one thing. So, as I said, I think that's all of that is there's a definite a toxic masculinity involved in capitalism and entrepreneurship today. And I honestly hope that part of what my book does, at least, is to start tackling some of those issues and to start illuminating what these alternative kind of options or paths might be.
Over to you, Stephen.
Can you define life profitability, like just for like our listeners and myself, like what does that mean, like life profitability?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is I firstly wanted to riff off of a word that most of us understand, right, which is profitability in the financial sense. But life profitability essentially just flips that and kind of takes that definition of profitability slightly broader. So the idea there is, how do I build a business that is not just financially profitable, but truly life profitable? So not narrow, but much wider. And the way I would try and kind of define or quantify that kind of wider or broader perspective is to say, I've got a life portfolio, and my work and professional ambition and my business is just one stock in that portfolio. But my family, my health, me sleeping well, me doing exercise, those things are part of it, right? Me having, making time to geek out about wine and drink some good wine, that's part of my life portfolio. Playing FIFA, on PlayStation, which is the only kind of gaming I do, that's part of that life portfolio. Similarly, there's bigger things there. I mentioned my desire for new challenges, my thirst for learning, like all those things. Those are the things in my life portfolio. And what I effectively need to do if I want to take the lens from my business's kind of standpoint is say, what do I need to do in my business so that I empower those things and not the other way around? Because I think we often, so many entrepreneurs start out on their journeys and they have this vision of freedom that they want to pursue. Like, I want to work in the way I want, when I want, on what I want, etc. And then they ultimately, like all of us have been there, I've been there, you get captured into a new thing. So you get some freedoms by all means, but then the worst kind of freedom that we give up is the fact that our businesses are now live in our pockets and we're super connected. Like, we never close an office door and just say, you know what, work is, for tomorrow again, or work is, this is Friday, I'm going to have a weekend with friends and family, whatever kind of floats your boat. But we trade so many other freedoms for this thing that we want. So I'm trying to have a different kind of conversation there, where it's like, hey, let's take a step back and figure out, like, what does it actually mean to live and be human? And I don't think I have a lot of very strong opinions. Again, like, going back to capitalism, at least, right? Capitalism is a human-made thing. And what we all acknowledge, at least, is humans are imperfect. Yet capitalism is like the predominant way in which we structure and live our lives at this stage. And I've honestly had enough. Like, I'm not saying I'm not bullish, I'm not ambitious, I'm not an entrepreneur, but that's not the version of entrepreneurship that I'm, keen on. Not for those that I care about.
Yeah, Adii, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here a little bit. Obviously, there's so many aspects of what you've just said, and hopefully we can do that in the bonus content. Obviously, we only got 30 minutes, so I don't want listeners just to hear my voice, because some say I speak too much anyway. But some of the response to some of the topics that you've put in the book is that, we got this white guy, this white privileged guy talking about the work-life balance. I'm sure he's a hard worker, but he's not on a minimum wage trying to feed his family. How do you respond to some of that criticism that your book has received a little bit?
Yeah, I think much of that is totally fair, right? I mean, I think, ultimately, if the rule was that no person that achieved something or reached some form of enlightenment are allowed to share some of their learnings or ideas, because it gets pointed out that, you are only saying this because you've been successful, then I think we're failing as a society in any way, right? I think that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, I think capitalism and our economies need a reform, right? I think someone living on a minimum wage, they might not have the ability to pursue life profitability as I propose right now, because ultimately at the core of it, yes, money still kind of you pays bills, and they might not be able to create the kind of space that I propose for anyone pursuing life profitability. I totally acknowledge that as well. My hope is, and one of the key components in the book talks about concentric circles. And what I mean with concentric circles is you start with you, then it kind of ripples outwards to those closest to you, your team members, your customers, stakeholders, etc., your society. And crucially, at least what I wanted to do with my team at Conversio was I wanted to figure out how can I have an impact. And instead of trying to solve one of these massive kind of global warming, worldwide poverty, etc., things that I'm probably too far away from and don't have the skills or the resources to tackle, what I instead tried to do was, how can I be a better entrepreneur, right? Which probably meant that I needed to do work on myself, right? And I needed to figure out my own family life. But then secondly, as a leader and a builder of my team, how can I help my team members do similar in their lives? Because what eventually happens is if I can do that and I can empower my team to do that, then we're all rippling outwards. And hopefully in future somewhere, because we're all pulling in a similar direction, we're helping those people that can't pursue life profitability on their own because of historical kind of disadvantages and just an imperfect system that got them into that place immediately, right? So ultimately, I think the TLDR there, Jonathan, is like it has to start somewhere, right? Like someone has to try and do something about this, and I'm not kind of the messiah here at all. I'm just a single person that is willing to stand up and say, hey, I've got a couple of ideas and I hope to inspire some people to try some of these things out to help build a better society.
Yeah, just to respond and then get a response, and then we have to wrap up the podcast, but the show, is that I'm not a great fan of those that provide like the 4-hour week concept of entrepreneurship. I've got to be honest, I think that's total bullshit, absolute bullshit. And when I have people, they're treated with respect if they're really bought into that ideology, but I think they're deluding themselves. I work crazy hours, but I'm single. I'm 57. 7 years ago, went through a messy divorce. But I work crazy hours, but I choose to, and I can. I'm in control to some extent. I work 5.5 days a week. It's best not really to call me on Saturday afternoons, and definitely, unless it's a life emergency, don't call me on Sundays. But the rest of the time, I'm pretty accessible because I'm in business. And if I can choose not to be, so you got to accept, but there's got to be boundaries as well. Is that one of the things you're trying to get across? Is that you've got to understand your own boundaries, understand yourself a bit, and there's got to be kind of boundaries personally and collectively.
Yeah, and yes, but I think boundaries are an important part of that. I think the key there is just that I don't think there is a one size fits all model here. And if all three of us kind of worked through, for example, the worksheets that I have in the book to define what life profitability looks like for us, we would each have a kind of perfectly unique and different version thereof. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Like the one thing I didn't want to do with the book is to propose a perfect blueprint which says, hey guys, just take these 10 steps and your life is going to be exponentially better. Because I also don't believe in that. I believe all of us are too unique to follow a single blueprint or live our lives by a single blueprint. So and to that, like I'm mostly agnostic then in terms of how people structure their lives in business. I think there's a few core things there, right? Which is, for starters, like your business needs to align with your personal values, right? As an example, like if it doesn't align with your personal values, it doesn't really matter how you work, what you work on, who you work with, like there's always going to be that disconnect. And that is the part. And I was speaking about life portfolio, right? I think that should be important to everyone because business and work isn't everything. And just having the clarity and awareness about what that is probably already better than going through life and just looking at to-do lists that are never ending.
That's great. Going to wrap up the podcast about the show. Adii's agreed to stay on. We're going to be talking a little bit more in depth in some of the big subject things that he's alluded to in the podcast part of the show. So, Adii, what's the best ways for people to learn more about you and some of your ideas?
Yeah, probably two places. The one would be if you're on social media, Twitter, at Adii. I'm relatively active there. And then otherwise, my personal website, which is adii.me, where there's details about the book, as well as about 10 years of writing about similar-ish things as well. So go there.
And Stephen, how can people find out more about you and your company?
Yeah, head over to zipfish.io, run a speed test, see how much faster your website can be.
That's great. And Stephen and his team have helped with the WP-Tonic website. They made it a much more speed machine, even like any old WordPress website. To say it's a little bit crammed with plugins and other stuff would be a slightly understatement. But he did a good cleanup, him and his team. I highly recommend them. Also, before we call the webcast, the podcast part of the show to an end, I want to tell you about a live webinar or educational seminar me and Spencer Forum are doing on Friday, the 9th of April. Basically, it's about how to replace ClickFunnels, or as I call them, dick funnels, and Shopify with WooCommerce and launch flows at literally a fraction of the cost, and you get more flexibility and power. It's going to be a fantastic webinar. You can watch it on YouTube live and you'll be able to ask us questions. That's at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. All you have to do is go to the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. You see it right in front of you, and you just click the reminder button and you'll be able to join us. We'll be back next week with another great guest, another great conversation. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye. So bonus content. As you were talking about, not only personally, but collectively, it is literally, we're living in the most strangest of times. It's literally, because I've always been a socialist myself, but always a capitalist at the same time. I strongly believe in entrepreneurship and small to medium business, always have and always will. But it's literally been made like it's a crime to run a business, literally, isn't it? You know, it's got such large businesses seem to be making it that you've got to be a bad dude to run your own business. You've got to be evil to succeed. Am I overstating it, or is there a bit of a taste of that, Adii? What do you think?
I'm not sure that it's being made out as a bad thing. I actually think the flip side is true, where there's so much romance around being an entrepreneur and running your own business.
That's true.
That it skews that path in a different way, right? So I actually believe that for many people starting business today, that they are probably better suited to find a really great company with a really great team working on a problem that they're truly interested in and joining them, right? Because I think for most people, they can probably use that as a much easier and more guaranteed way to get to what they actually want. And the crucial thing here is, for me at least, is I don't think nobody is really after money. All of us are after what money can buy us. And this, I think, is generally true for anyone that has made any kind of money in their life, because if money is the only goal, which partly I get it is, but that milestone just shifts, right? You make $100, you want to figure out how to make 200, you figure out how to make 1,000. So money never is really the goal. It's always about I want to buy this car, or I want to pay off my mortgage, or I want to feel secure or stable in my family. So hence why I think, I said, I think entrepreneurship is hyped up and romanticized to a large extent, and it skews that. Where
Definitely.
So
yes.
Yeah.
You're so right about it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just getting over enthusiastic, Adii. I'm sorry. Over to you, Stephen.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think depending on who you are in the world, like you skew one direction or the other direction, right? I think it's just like a human problem. Like there's no true middle, right? But I think it's interesting how there has been a pushback on large businesses treating people as like numbers and like how much revenue can this person generate for us. And I think that's where you get into like this, oh, capitalism, corporate America, like is evil. Because like when you take the humanity out of something, then you lose what makes being human magical, right? Like this idea of like we can go and explore and do and feel and think. But as long as like that perspective is there, like then a human is a human, and a human as a company, like we try to allow people to reach whatever goals they have. Let's say, I have an employee that wants to buy a boat, or somebody that just wants to pay off their mortgage or their college debt. Like how do you as a company help that person achieve their life profitability, if you will? And everybody kind of has their own metrics, but that's how capitalism, I think, like should be used or ought to be used. And sometimes just vilifying capitalism as a whole is too simplistic, or propping up entrepreneurship as the solution to everybody's problem is also too simplistic, because a lot of times like people's life goals or what's going to make them happy is not running their own business. It's just, doing whatever that unique combination, like you said, those concentric circles are. And I love that idea that like everyone has like their own unique like set of that, and not, you can't apply it to other people. You can't apply yours to other people, and you can't force them on people, whether it's starting a business or whether it's just working for a great company.
Yeah, and I think what, to that extent, like probably as a universal truth for me, right, is as soon as something starts sounding like dogma, right, it's like get the hell away, right? Because like then, like there's just like it just becomes too generic, right? And again, like I think the one thing I truly believe in is I believe in that, like our individualism, like our uniqueness as an individual. I believe in the magic that all of us can bring, right? Hence, to some extent, I will thus always be that punk rebel that doesn't fully conform to any kind of law or societal rule that gets imposed, because I understand why it's there, but it's not to optimize for our individual magic, right? It is there to get us to try and run an efficient society, and those two things are totally different.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question that I want to get to that's a little like in a different direction though. But I want to ask this before we run out of time. So your background is WordPress. You've been a WordPress guy for a long time. Your current site is in Ghost though. It looks like. And so how did you decide to like move or try out other things besides WordPress? Are you still like a WordPress fan person that just like lives and dies WordPress? Or
how can you live for yourself, Adii?
Yeah, exactly.
No, shame. I just find no shame.
I'm on the shame. Old Matt won't talk to me anymore. I'm on the shame list, and you're on the shame list now, Adii.
No, you have your own life profitability metrics, and maybe Ghost is on there somewhere. No, I just always find it curious, like when people who have like been really deep and in depth into a certain platform or a certain like aspect of the web, like have other things like in shifted, and just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, So I think firstly, like with tools, I think it's a horses for courses thing, right? So I don't think it's a one, if you like one tool, like you can also like other things for different things, right? So I think that's the first part of it. The second part of it probably is that Woo was an early backer of John's Ghost Kickstarter project back in the day, right? So like we were supporting open source publishing. That was really what we were after there. And I think, to like for anyone that doesn't follow John O'Nolan, the founder of Ghost on Twitter, like he regularly shares their numbers and things. And it's incredible the business that they've built, and the way, for example, that they position Ghost now as an open alternative to Substack, for example, right? So there's many things there. I think my decision there was just that I float in and out of actively using my site, to be honest, right? Where I'm writing and actually using it. And Ghost, at the time that I made that decision for my personal site, at least, which is lightweight and new. And I think the newness is important there, because I know what sometimes happens when you replace a tool, or when I've replaced the tool, it creates that energy to actually use the tool, i.e. do the thing that you're supposed to be doing, in my case, writing. So that's why I have Ghost there. And I think it's a perfect choice, lightweight choice for what I need. On Cogsy's marketing website, same with Conversion's marketing website, it's all WordPress, right? I truly believe that like there's more flexibility, more extensibility there that I am going to need. I might not need it on day one of the project, but I still believe that WordPress completely makes sense. And I'll even throw this out there. I think even in the e-commerce space, Shopify is obviously an incredible business, just like WooCommerce. And I think WordPress plus WooCommerce is a superb and powerful choice for a very specific business, right? For a business that has technical resources in-house, likely, right? Versus someone that where the focus or the kind of the core competency is not that technical, maybe slightly more marketing or product development, then go Shopify. So that's really how I think about horses for courses. I don't think any one tool should serve everyone.
Mm-hmm. What is your thought of the WordPress landscape right now? There's been a pretty big upheaval in page builders, Gutenberg. You have Elementor on the scene that's doing crazy things and have some crazy numbers now. And then WooCommerce fitting into all of that. There's rumors flying around every day that Elementor is going to come out with their own e-commerce platform and system. I mean, who knows if that's true? It's just there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of money being infused into the WordPress world. So things seem to be taking off and getting shaken up on a daily. What's your overall feeling, especially coming back from 2007 when WordPress was very, very different?
Yeah, I think probably the best thing that I can share is I am not that in the loop about what is happening in the WordPress space. And the best thing that could have ever happened to me was slightly exiting the WordPress space when I left Woo, and just just literally coming up for air. I think because when I was there, we're all aware of the politics that comes with open source, etc., with WordPress. And I don't even say that in a bad way, but it becomes a bit of an echo chamber somewhere. And the biggest benefit that I've had is that seeing how other ecosystems and stuff operates, that's been a breath of fresh air. So even now, yes, I'm building software again that will be built on top of WooCommerce as well, right? So I'm there or thereabouts, but I'm not as entrenched as always. I think what is fascinating is that, you mentioned Elementor. The guys over, Sahed over at Automotive, they've built a really, really big business. I think what is WP Engine is a unicorn, right? Based on their recent round of funding. So I think what is fascinating though is that WordPress remains such a big platform on which to build on or around, and it is spawning multi-million-dollar companies in its own right. And I think that is fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's great. I just want to ask you, because hopefully got another few minutes. So you decided to stay in South Africa. Do you think has that been a hindrance in some ways, that conscious decision to stay in South Africa, in building you're on your third company now? Has it been, or do you see it as a great benefit to stay in South Africa, or do you think it hasn't really affected the direction of your businesses really?
Yeah. So the only hindrance is scheduling. I mean, this being an example, right? I mean, it's just coming up on 7 p.m. for me here. I've got another call after this, right? So I sometimes have to do that as a compromise for living in South Africa, acknowledging that I build businesses where a lot of it is still US centric. So I'm going to have to work and compromise on what a normal day looks like for me. So that's the only real hindrance. I actually think, though, holistically, it's been a big benefit not being elsewhere in the world, not being in one of the kind of your bigger tech hubs. I do not think, for example, that we could have built WooCommerce if Magnus, Mark, and I were based in Silicon Valley or New York. I don't think so, because I think I think we brought a whole different perspective to that. I think, at least Mark and I are South African as well. I think we brought a resilience, right, a way of figuring shit out that I don't think we would have had if we were literally had a different kind of echo chamber around us. And we all have echo chambers, like that happens, but we weren't that entrenched in it. We were slightly removed, and hence we managed to carve out our own path. And I think for me as an entrepreneur as well, and as an individual, I would probably be saying very different things if I lived elsewhere in the world. So I actually think that diversity in perspective has been an advantage, because I still get the predominant perspective, right? I'm still on social media. I still read the publications. I have many friends in those big tech hubs all around the world now, right? So I still get the perspective. I'm just not as physically entrenched in that, and I'm exposed to so many other things as well by living in a third world country.
Well, you have to come back on the show, because I've got about half a dozen other questions, but obviously I've got to respect your time, and being you've got another call, but hopefully you agree to come back on the show. I've really enjoyed the interview. Hopefully you have, Adii. And thank you for being so frank and honest during the conversation. It's been much appreciated. Like I say, listeners and viewers, we'll be back next week with another great guest. Adii, and also you can join us on our Friday show, which is a round table show, which I always enjoy, where we have great discussions about WordPress and technology in general. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye.